Early March 1943. Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. A wrench slipped from oil-streaked hands. Captain Paul Irvin Gunn stood staring at the bomber before him. A plane that should not have existed. It broke every rule in the U.S. Army Air Force's manuals. It flew without official permission. Where a bombardier's glass nose belonged, 8 forward-firing, 50-caliber machine guns now jutted out. The B-25 Mitchell, built to bomb from altitude, had been remade into something else, a ship killer, a commerce destroyer. An unauthorized experiment that could win battles or send its creator to a court-martial. Neither Gunn nor anyone else imagined that this outlaw modification, born of rage and desperation, would help trigger the most crushing defeat the Japanese Navy faced in the Pacific Campaign. The math of Allied success in the Southwest Pacific was not being written in strategy rooms in Washington. It was being welded and bolted together in maintenance hangars by a 43-year-old maverick fighting his own private war. That fight began 2 years earlier, on December 8, 1941, Manila time. Paul Irvin Gunn, not yet called Pappy by anyone, watched from Nichols Field as Japanese bombers tore the American Air Forces apart in the Philippines. As manager of the fledgling Philippine Airlines, he oversaw 4 Red Beach 18 civilian planes. Within hours, Major General Louis H. Brereton would requisition those planes and commission Gunn as a captain in the Army Air Forces. What was meant to be a brief wartime stint turned into a 3-year path of invention, revenge, and technical upheaval. Gunn was 42 years old then and a former Navy Chief Petty Officer who had spent roughly 20 years as an enlisted naval aviator before retiring in December 1939. He learned to fly in the 1920s, flew with the Top Hatters Fighter Squadron, and instructed at Pensacola. He knew aircraft from the inside out. Not from textbooks, but from decades of hands-on work, flying and sometimes crashing them. That December morning, expertise counted for little. Gunn had something far more urgent, his family. His wife, Clara Louise, called Polly by people who knew her, and their 4 children lived in Manila as Japanese forces closed in. His sons, Paul Jr. and Nathan, were teenagers. His daughters, Connie and Julie, were younger. The comfortable expatriate life evaporated overnight. Gunn flew reconnaissance and transport missions as the Philippine defenses collapsed. He dodged Japanese fighters, survived being shot down over jungle, walked out to safety and climbed into another aircraft the next day. He flew an unarmed transport into Bataan under enemy control to deliver medical supplies and earned a Distinguished Flying Cross for the risk. He could not get his family out. On Christmas Eve 1941, orders came to evacuate key personnel to Australia. Gunn pooled his military pay, borrowed from fellow officers, and prepared to take his family. The Japanese advance was too fast. His family missed the airfield. Faced with orders in the wider war, he flew to Australia. On January 20th, 1942, Polly and the children were rounded up by Japanese forces and taken to the University of Santo Tomas, converted into an internment camp for enemy civilians. When Gunn learned this, something inside him broke. The man who kept fighting was no longer the same person who had left Manila. He had left his wife and 4 children in enemy hands. Each day they remained in that camp was a day he could not shield them. He could not reach them. He chose to try to end the war faster. If he could not rescue his family directly, he reasoned, he could destroy the ships, planes, and supply lines that kept the Japanese forces supplied. This was not policy. This was vengeance with a toolbox. In late July 1942, Major General George Kenney arrived in Brisbane to take command of Allied air operations in the Southwest Pacific. He found chaos, poor morale, weak equipment, and Japanese control of the skies over New Guinea, menacing Australia. General Douglas MacArthur had little faith in his air forces and made that clear. Kenney, 53 years old and a World War I fighter ace with 2 confirmed kills and a Silver Star, was an instructor-turned-strategist who thought differently. After listening to MacArthur's criticisms, Kenney asked for one power, to send home anyone he deemed deadwood. MacArthur agreed. Kenney reshaped the command. He brought in aggressive younger officers and built a forward headquarters in New Guinea. He gave Brigadier General Ennis Whitehead authority to reassign aircraft based on weather and tactics rather than waiting for Brisbane. But swapping officers changed nothing unless they had weapons that worked. Medium and high-altitude bombing was failing against ships. Attacks from high above gave ships time to react. B-17 flying fortresses were hitting less than 1% of their targets. Japanese convoys resupplied garrisons in New Guinea with near impunity. Allied ground troops were slaughtered while fresh Japanese troops landed by sea. Kenney had been thinking about a solution since 1928, when he taught at the Air Tactical School, skip bombing. The tactic called for dropping bombs at very low altitude, so they would skip across the water like stones and slam into a ship's side below the waterline, where armor was weakest. The idea worked on paper. In practice, it was dangerous. Aircraft approaching at mast height faced heavy anti-aircraft fire, and many bombers lacked forward-firing weapons to suppress shipboard gunners. Then Kenney heard about Paul Gunn. In August 1942, he learned someone in the 3rd Attack Group was illegally modifying A-20 Havoc light attack planes. The work was crude but effective. Someone had removed the bombardier from the transparent nose and installed 50 caliber guns to fire forward, creating a strafing plane that could suppress defenders at low altitude before dropping bombs. Kenney traced the work to Captain Paul Gunn, who had been scavenging weapons from wrecked fighters and mounting them on attack airplanes. Gunn had taught himself aircraft modification through trial and error. He had no formal degree in engineering, but he knew aircraft structures, weight, and weapon systems from hands-on experience. Most officers would have court-martialed him for altering military aircraft without permission. Kenney did the opposite. He assigned Gunn to his personal staff as Special Projects Officer and gave him an impossible task: modify every A-20 in the theater for low-altitude attack, and do it fast. Gunn worked 18-hour days. He salvaged guns from crashed planes, fashioned mounting brackets in makeshift workshops, and personally test flew each modified aircraft. He added 4 50 caliber machine guns to the nose of each A-20, mounted extra guns along the fuselage, and installed bomb racks for parachute fragmentation bombs. The modified A-20s, the Strafer A-20s, went into combat in September 1942, striking the Japanese airfield at Buna. The results stunned commanders. The Strafer A-20s dove in at treetop level, guns blazing, silencing anti-aircraft defenses before releasing their bombs. Japanese defenders, trained to spot high-altitude bombers minutes in advance, had almost no time to react. What began as unauthorized tinkering in backyard hangars became a tactical revolution. Gunn's work, driven by personal loss and brutal necessity, changed the rules of air attack in the Southwest Pacific and handed Allied forces a tool they needed to turn the tide. The attack wiped out dozens of aircraft on the ground and proved that low-level strafing could change air warfare. George C. Kenney ordered Paul Irvin Gunn to apply the same idea to B-25 Mitchell medium bombers. The B-25 was bigger than the A-20, had greater range, carried heavier bomb loads, and could hold more forward-firing weapons. If Gunn could turn the Mitchell into a gunship, it would become the theater's most effective anti-shipping tool. The B-25 Mitchell was designed in 1939 as a medium-altitude level bomber. It was a twin-engine plane with a wingspan of 67 ft7 powered by 2 Wright R2600 radial engines producing 1,700 horsepower each. Standard armament included 6 50 caliber machine guns for defense and up to 3,000 lb of bombs. The crew numbered 5: pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, radio operator, and gunner. The aircraft was named for General Billy Mitchell, the outspoken air power advocate who had been court-martialed in 1925. About 9,090 B-25s would eventually be built at 2 North American aviation plants, one in Inglewood, California, and another in Kansas City, Kansas. The B-25 had already earned fame in April 1942, when Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle led 16 B-25Bs on the strike against Tokyo from USS Hornet. The raid caused little physical damage, but delivered a massive morale boost and forced Japan to keep fighters at home to defend the mainland. Despite that, the Mitchell's main mission stayed medium-altitude bombing, a role that was ineffective against ships. Gunn saw something others missed. The B-25's nose was large enough to accept several heavy machine guns. Twin engines meant the plane could survive the loss of one. The sturdy airframe tolerated punishment. Critically, the Mitchell's range reached shipping lanes that the shorter-range A-20 could not. In late 1942, Gunn began converting B-25s in a maintenance hangar at Townsville, Australia, working with Captain Jack Fox, the North American Aviation Technical Representative in theater. Fox's job should have been to enforce factory specs. Instead, he became Gunn's partner in this unauthorized program, the most successful illicit aircraft modification effort of the war. The first step was removing the bombardier and the glass nose, saving weight and eliminating a useless position for low-altitude attacks. Gunn fitted a solid metal nose and mounted 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, all firing forward and controlled by the pilot. Each gun carried 500 rounds. Their rate of fire was roughly 850 rounds per minute per gun, producing a concentrated burst of lead capable of shredding exposed targets in seconds. 4 nose guns weren't enough. Gunn added 2 more, 50 caliber guns in cheek blisters on either side of the forward fuselage, placed so they cleared the propeller arc. These fixed guns increased the plane's frontal firepower. Next, Gunn made a bold change to the dorsal turret. The B-25's turret, with twin 50 caliber guns mounted behind the cockpit, normally defended against attacks from above and behind. Gunn locked that turret facing forward and wired it so the co-pilot could aim it from a cockpit sight. A master trigger let the pilot fire all weapons together. The result? 8 forward firing, 50 caliber machine guns delivering roughly 180 lb of projectiles per second. The modified B-25 carried the forward firepower of more than 1 fighter, while still hauling about 2,000 lb of bombs. Those changes created serious engineering problems. The heavier nose pushed the center of gravity forward, making the bomber nose-heavy and harder to handle. Gunn shifted interior equipment and added ballast to the tail to rebalance the plane. The recoil from 8 guns firing at once stressed the structure. He reinforced the nose with extra bracing. Heat and smoke from sustained firing demanded ventilation upgrades and safer ammo storage to cut fire risk. Gun harmonization was critical. All 8 guns had to converge at a single point ahead of the aircraft, typically between 200 and 400 YD. Misaligned guns sprayed bullets uselessly. Gunn developed a ground test. Fixed targets placed at known distances, repeated adjustments to each mounting, and careful test firing until every barrel met at the chosen convergence point. He personally test-fired and adjusted each ship, refusing to approve any aircraft until it met his standards. With a production line method and trained maintenance crews, each conversion took about 2 weeks of non-stop work. By December 1942, Gunn had altered enough B-25s to outfit the 91st Bombardment Squadron. Kenney needed a commander who understood low-altitude attack and would ignore conventional bombing doctrine. He chose Major Ed Lonnie, a pilot promoted rapidly for aggressive leadership and skill in low-level missions. Lonnie and Gunn together shaped the tactics that would change naval combat. Their plan: approach enemy ships at extremely low altitude, sometimes as low as 50 ft above the water, at top speed, about 300 mph. At that height and velocity, ship gunners could not track the aircraft effectively. Closing speed outpaced manual aiming. By the time gunners adjusted, the bomber had already passed. Pilots opened up with all 8 forward guns at about 1,000 YD and walked the fire onto the target, sweeping decks, killing or suppressing anti-aircraft crews, destroying gun positions and shredding superstructure. The goal was not to sink the ship with bullets but to silence defenses and terrify the crew. Next came the bombs. At roughly 200 to 400 YD, flying at the minimum safe altitude, the pilot released a bomb fitted with a 4 to 5 second delayed fuse. The bomb left the plane at about 300 mph, hit the water and skipped across the surface. It might bounce once or twice and then strike the vessel's side at or below the waterline. The delay prevented immediate detonation. The bomb penetrated the hull and sank slightly before exploding. Exploding beneath the waterline targeted the weakest part of the ship. Water transmitted the shock, amplifying damage. A single underwater detonation could break a keel, rupture fuel tanks, flood engine rooms, and cause catastrophic structural failure. By the time the bomb exploded, the B-25 was already climbing away to avoid the blast and any secondary explosions. From opening fire to bomb release, a full attack unfolded in about 10 seconds. Skip bombing was not entirely new. The British had experimented with it and some American crews had tried it. Combining skip bombing with overwhelming forward firepower was Gunn's innovation. That combination made the modified B-25 a lethal, fast, and surprisingly precise anti-shipping weapon. The strafer nose turned the bomber into its own fighter escort, suppressing shipboard defenses before the bombs fell. That mix of heavy forward fire and low-level bombing would prove lethal. While Paul Irvin Gunn was converting aircraft, Allied intelligence tracked Japanese naval movement. Ultra intercepts, the the code-breaking effort that had pierced Japanese naval ciphers, supplied timely, detailed enemy plans. Fleet Radio Unit Melbourne, known as FRUMEL, was reading Japanese traffic almost in real time. In late February 1943, FRUMEL intercepted messages saying a large Japanese convoy was assembling at Rabaul on New Britain. The convoy's destination was Lae on the northern coast of New Guinea. The cargo, troops and supplies to reinforce Japanese forces holding back Allied advances in Papua. The intelligence was precise. 8 transport ships would carry approximately 6,900 troops of the 51st Division. 8 destroyers would escort them. The convoy would sail from Rabaul at midnight on February 28, 1943, and reach Lae about 3 days later. This was Japan's last big attempt to reinforce New Guinea. If it got through, the Japanese position would be much stronger. If it failed, Japan would lose thousands of trained soldiers and likely avoid another major seaborne reinforcement. General Kenney saw a chance to test Gunn's conversions and the new tactics on a target of the highest priority since Pearl Harbor. He gathered every available unit for a single coordinated strike. The force would include B-17 Flying Fortresses bombing from medium altitude, Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters strafing low, P-38 Lightning fighters for cover, and modified B-25 strafers using skip bombing profiles. It would be the biggest coordinated air operation in the Southwest Pacific up to that point. Kenney personally briefed squadron commanders on February 28th. Orders were blunt. Find the convoy, attack without mercy, spare nothing, sink every ship. This was not a raid. This was destruction. At midnight on February 28, 1943, the Japanese convoy left Simpson Harbor at Rabaul under the command of Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura aboard the destroyer Shirayuki. The convoy consisted of 8 transports: Kyokomaru, Kambumaru, Teyomaru, Nojimaru, Ayomaru, Tamaru, Shinmi Maru, and Wawa Maru, escorted by 8 destroyers: Shirayuki, Asashio, Arashio, Tokitsukaze, Yukikaze, Uranami, Shikinami, and Asagumo. About 100 A6M0 fighters were assigned as air cover for the voyage. This was the strongest resupply force Japan had committed to New Guinea. Commanders expected losses, but believed enough ships would survive to deliver the troops. The convoy was spotted that afternoon by a B-24 Liberator on patrol. The crew radioed the position, course, and composition. Kenney's staff launched reconnaissance aircraft to keep eyes on the convoy. Weather initially favored the Japanese. 2 tropical storms rolled through the area, bringing cloud cover and poor visibility. Allied planes kept contact but could not press effective attacks through the storms. The transports pushed ahead at about 7 knots, roughly 8 miles per hour, limited by heavy loads. The destroyers could have done 20 knots or more, but they were tied to the convoy's slow pace. By nightfall on March 1st, the convoy had covered about 90 km, roughly halfway to Lae. The worsening weather helped Kimura. Fewer Allied aircraft could attack, but rough seas battered the transports and troops below decks suffered severe seasickness in crowded holds. On the morning of March 2, 1943, the weather eased and Allied reconnaissance regained good contact. At about 10 a.m., 29 B-17 Flying Fortresses attacked from $5,000 F-18 high-altitude bombing proved largely ineffective. B-17 crews claimed hits, but Japanese records show only minor damage to 1 transport. The raid did force the convoy to change course repeatedly and slowed progress toward Lae. Throughout March 2nd, additional B-17 strikes continued, dropping dozens of bombs. Ships maneuvered and Japanese fighters engaged the bombers. Several B-17s suffered damage. 3 Japanese fighters were shot down. No transport sank. The high-altitude efforts harried the convoy but did not stop it. Kenney knew the decisive strike would come the next morning. The modified B-25s were ready. Major Ed Lonnie had briefed his air crews until every pilot understood the profile. They had rehearsed on a wrecked ship on February 28th using combined formations of B-17s, B-25s, P-38s, and Beaufighters. The skip bombing technique had been practiced. The strafing guns had been harmonized. Ordnance was loaded. The point of no return approached. At dawn on March 3, 1943, conditions were ideal. Clear skies, calm seas, excellent visibility. Kimura's convoy was about 30 km from Lae, close enough that land-based anti-aircraft guns could offer support, but still highly exposed. Roughly 90 Allied aircraft staged at Cape Ward Hunt and converged on the convoy, including B-17 Flying Fortresses, modified B-25 Strafers, RAF Beaufighters, and P-38 Lightning escorts. Multiple attack waves came from different directions throughout the day. The assault began at about 10 a.m. B-17 struck first from medium altitude to distract and force ships to maneuver. Then low-level aircraft moved in. Viewfighters hit with cannon and machine gun strafing to suppress anti-aircraft crews. The destroyers poured every gun they had into the attackers, but closing speeds were lethal. Then the modified B-25 Strafers struck and slaughter followed. B-25 Strafers flew in repeated waves. One pilot picked the transport Kyoko Maru and dove to 50 ft above the water. At 1,000 he opened fire. The combined guns, 8 50 caliber weapons with a combined cyclic rate measured in thousands of rounds per minute, unleashed a torrent of lead. Tracers marked the path as the stream walked from bow to superstructure, tearing through deck fittings and killing crewmen at their stations. Sailors were cut down in the open. The strafing did more than cause casualties. It suppressed shipboard gunners, destroyed key anti-aircraft positions, and turned the ship's deck into chaos. With defenses neutralized, the B-25s executed the skip bombing run. Pilots released delayed fuse bombs at close range so the ordnance would skip across the sea, strike the hull near or below the waterline, sink slightly, and then detonate under the ship. Underwater explosions were devastating. They could ruin a keel, burst fuel tanks, flood engine rooms, and trigger catastrophic structural failure. By the time a bomb detonated, the attacking bomber was already climbing away to escape the blast. From the first bursts of gunfire to bomb release, a single attack sequence lasted only seconds. The combination of precise strafing and skip bombing overwhelmed the convoy that day and produced results no high-altitude raid could match. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was the proof that Gunn's conversions and Kenney's tactics had turned the modified B-25 into a decisive anti-shipping weapon. The destroyer eventually went down under conventional bombs. Gunn claimed publicly that his cannon fire had sunk the ship, but in private he admitted that the bombs had delivered the final blow. After the B-25G, the next version to appear was the B-25H. About 1,000 of these were produced, each carrying the 75mm cannon along with 14 50 caliber machine guns positioned throughout the aircraft. The H model shifted the dorsal turret forward and removed the co-pilot's seat to save weight, with the navigator now responsible for loading the cannon. The firepower was immense, but it made the aircraft nose-heavy and more difficult to fly. Wright Field, the Army Air Force Development Center, sent Gunn a message warning that the modifications were unsafe and recommending that the planes be grounded until the balance issue was fixed. Gunn is said to have replied, "Put center of gravity in storage for the duration. We have a war to fight." Whether true or not, the story reflected his mindset. Combat results mattered more than technical perfection. Pilots quickly adapted to the handling challenges. The last production model, the B-25J, returned to a standard bombardier nose in some versions, while others kept the strafer layout. A total of 43-18 were built, making it the most common variant. Certain B-25Js carried 8 forward-firing machine guns in the nose, 4 more in cheek blisters, 2 in the dorsal turret, and another 4 in waist positions. In total, the firepower could reach 18 50 caliber machine guns, making it the most heavily armed bomber of World War II. Although this level of armament wasn't always necessary, it terrified Japanese troops who learned to dread the sound of the Mitchell's engines, a signal that destruction was coming. During 1943 and 1944, modified B-25s hammered Japanese positions across the Pacific. In August 1943, strafers attacked Japanese airfields at Wewak in New Guinea. The raids destroyed 174 planes on the ground, shattering Japanese air power in the region. Wewak was at the very limit of the B-25's normal range, but Gunn had solved that problem. He created a crude but effective system using auxiliary fuel tanks carried inside the bomb bay. After the fuel was consumed, the tanks were simply dumped through a hole in the floor. The setup filled the aircraft with fumes and allowed cold air to rush through the fuselage, but it extended the bomber's range by hundreds of miles. Thanks to this system, the Wewak raid succeeded, breaking Japanese control of the skies and allowing Allied forces to advance. In November 1943, B-25 struck Rebel Harbor in one of the most daring raids of the war. Major Raymond Jock Hennebrey led 38 Mitchells against the well-defended port. Flying at mast height, the bombers tore into shipping while P-38 fighters provided cover and phosphorus bombs created smoke screens. Out of 38 vessels in the harbor, 30 were hit. A heavy cruiser, 3 destroyers, and multiple transports and support ships were sunk or disabled. The attack crippled Rabaul as a forward base and proved that even the most fortified Japanese strongholds could be smashed by low-flying B-25s. In the Philippines campaign of 1944, B-25 strafers became feared as bats out of hell. Their attacks were so fast and so low that defenders had almost no chance to respond. They destroyed supply lines, sank shipping, and provided close support for advancing ground troops. Gunn's modified B-25s were not the only weapon driving the Pacific campaign, but they were among the most effective. They destroyed hundreds of ships, wiped out thousands of aircraft on the ground, and killed tens of thousands of enemy troops. More importantly, they enabled General MacArthur's island-hopping strategy by isolating Japanese garrisons and ensuring Allied control of the air. While Gunn's aircraft were winning battles, his own family remained imprisoned at Santo Tomas. Letters arrived occasionally through the Red Cross, but were rare and heavily censored. He knew conditions inside the camp were worsening: food shortages, disease, and harsher treatment from the guards as Japan began losing the war. Gunn could do nothing but fight harder, believing every mission might bring the war's end closer. In late 1944, Gunn was still flying combat missions at age 45 when American forces invaded Leyte. During a Japanese night raid on Tacloban airfield, phosphorus bombs exploded near him, shrapnel tearing into his shoulder. His right arm was badly damaged and left useless. Evacuated to Australia, he spent months recovering. The wound ended his combat flying days, but the war itself was nearly over. On February 3, 1945, the U.S. 1st Cavalry Division stormed Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila, just as Japanese guards prepared to execute the camp leaders. In the chaos, over 4,000 prisoners were freed, including Polly Gunn and her 4 children. They had survived 3 years and 14 days of captivity. MacArthur visited shortly afterward and arranged for the family to be flown to Australia to reunite with Gunn. Weeks later, the long-separated family embraced again. They were alive but deeply changed by the ordeal. After recovering, Gunn continued serving with the Army Air Forces, promoted to lieutenant colonel, and later retiring as a full colonel on June 30, 1948, medically discharged due to his injuries. His decorations included the Distinguished Flying Cross with an oak leaf cluster, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Air Medal, 9 Purple Hearts, and numerous campaign ribbons. The 9 Purple Hearts represented 9 separate combat wounds, a rare distinction. Returning to civilian life, Gunn re-established Philippine Airlines, helping to reconnect the nation's scattered islands after years of war. He never stopped flying. On October 11, 1957, just a week before his 58th birthday, Gunn was piloting a charter flight when the plane was caught in a violent storm and crashed. He was killed instantly. Gunn was buried at Barrancas National Cemetery in Pensacola, Florida, where he had once trained naval aviators. His legacy lived on in the B-25 strafer modifications that became standard in the Pacific, in the countless missions they made possible, and in the generations of pilots who followed his example of innovation under fire. Approximately 9,890 B-25 Mitchells were produced during the war, and thousands of them were converted into strafers using Gunn's designs. The skip bombing method he refined destroyed hundreds of Japanese ships and played a major role in securing Allied victory in the Pacific. Gunn proved that critical innovation didn't always come from official channels. It could come from a determined father working in a hangar, driven by personal loss. While military leadership often wanted to fight the war with existing tactics and equipment, Gunn demonstrated that extraordinary times required new solutions. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea became a textbook example for military leaders around the world. With intelligence, coordination, new tactics, and new weapons, the Allies achieved a decisive victory at minimal cost. 8 transports were destroyed, 4 destroyers sunk, and more than 5,000 Japanese lives lost, all in exchange for only 4 Allied aircraft. The numbers told the story. A force without air superiority simply could not survive. Every Japanese ship lost meant countless supplies that would never arrive, troops that would never fight, and weapons that would never be used. Striking enemy supplies before they ever reached the front was the most effective form of warfare. and the modified B-25 made this possible. One strafer could travel hundreds of miles, unleash overwhelming firepower, smash enemy defenses, sink ships with skip bombing, and return safely for another mission. What once required several types of aircraft could now be done by one. Japan understood this lesson too late. After the disaster, they stopped sending large convoys through daylight routes within Allied range. Instead, they shifted to night movements, submarines and barges hugging the coastline. But even these methods couldn't escape Allied attacks. B-25 strafers hunted barges with the same efficiency as they hunted ships. Radar-equipped B-25s tracked down convoys at night. There was no safe route, no safe time, and no safe place for Japanese resupply. Gradually, Japanese garrisons in New Guinea, the Philippines, and across the Pacific were cut off. Brave as they were, Japanese troops fought on with dwindling supplies and no hope of reinforcement. Air superiority, secured in part by modified B-25s, made their courage irrelevant. By 1945, the modified B-25 had become the standard anti-shipping aircraft in the Pacific. The G, H, and J variants carried increasingly heavy armament, but the core design remained Gunn's idea. A medium bomber turned into a flying gunship, capable of smashing defenses at low altitude and delivering devastating strikes. Even as the war ended in August 1945, B-25 strafers were still flying combat missions. They were even part of the escort for the Japanese surrender delegation traveling from Japan to Manila, an appropriate role for the aircraft that had helped make that surrender inevitable. Historians on both sides later confirmed the importance of Gunn's innovations. Japanese officers admitted that after the Bismarck Sea, they knew it was impossible to move large forces within range of Allied air bases. The psychological shock was as damaging as the physical destruction. Convoy leaders understood that low-flying bombers could appear suddenly and wipe out entire formations. The modified B-25 created a new kind of warfare. Medium bombers that hunted ships with the precision of submarines and the firepower of naval cruisers. The influence extended far beyond World War II. Air forces around the globe studied skip bombing and forward-firing gun designs. The concept of the gunship, aircraft designed to destroy targets with overwhelming gunfire, grew directly from Gunn's ideas. The AC-47, AC-119, and AC-130 gunships later used in Vietnam and other wars were spiritual descendants of his B-25s. Of the 9,090 B-25s built, more than 100 survive today, most in the United States. Many remain in flying condition and appear at air shows where crowds are awed by their sound, size, and history. The roar of the twin Wright R-2600 engines is unforgettable. Watching one bank low over an airfield gives a glimpse of what Japanese sailors saw in their final moments. Several restored aircraft are equipped with forward-firing guns, and when they fire blanks during demonstrations, the muzzle blasts shake the air and the recoil rocks the plane, reminders of the devastation they once delivered. Museums worldwide preserve B-25s in various forms. The National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Dayton, Ohio has several examples. The National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, where Gunn once instructed, displays another. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum also holds examples to preserve their history. Each tells the story of desperate innovation that led to decisive victory. In 1959, General George Kenney, by then retired, published The Saga of Pappy Gunn. The biography recounted Gunn's modifications, his missions, and his personal fight to free his family. Kenney described Gunn as one of the most important figures in the Pacific War, a man whose unauthorized ideas saved countless Allied lives and shortened the conflict. Nathaniel Gunn, Pappy's youngest son, later added his own accounts describing his family's experience in Santo Tomas and the long struggle for liberation. Their stories became a testament to both the human toll of war and the resilience needed to endure. In 1975, the U.S. Air Force posthumously honored Gunn by naming a training facility after him. It was late recognition but meaningful. Gunn himself had never sought fame, only results. His refusal to accept existing limits produced innovations that reshaped the war. The modified B-25 destroyed hundreds of Japanese ships, killed thousands of enemy troops, and played a critical role in winning the Pacific Campaign. Gunn's work showed that innovation often comes from unlikely places, that unorthodox ideas can save lives, and that one determined man can alter the course of history. His weapon was born in a hangar out of desperation. It went into battle at wave-top height, guns firing, bombs skipping across the water to tear open hulls. It strangled Japan's supply lines, shortened the war, and in the end reunited a family who had endured 3 years of captivity. That had been the point all along.